The screaming stopped at 14:32 hours, Martian Standard Time. Commander Vex Aldarian stood in the charred remains of what had been the Kepler research station, watching crimson dust swirl through holes in the dome where energy weapons had punched through. Reinforced titanium like paper, 73 of humanity's brightest minds had been working here 12 hours ago. Now there were only scorch marks, overturned lab equipment, and the metallic stench of vaporized blood. Sir, Lieutenant Cora Thane's voice crackled through his, calm, barely audible over the wind howling through the breached hull. "We found something." Aldarian picked his way through the debris, his mag boots clanking against twisted metal. In the central laboratory, Thane knelt beside what looked like a child's drawing etched into the floor. With a plasma cutter crude symbols that hurt to look at directly. "What am I looking at, Lieutenant?" "Near as we can tell, it's a message. Dr. Hensley managed to scratch this out before." She gestured helplessly at the devastation around them. "The linguistics AI says it's Vorthic script." Rough translation reads, "The learned ones require your knowledge bearers. Compliance ensures survival. Resistance ensures extinction." Aldarian's jaw tightened. The Vorthic collective spacefaring scavengers who strip mine civilizations for their technological advances before moving on. They'd been raiding the outer colonies for months. But this was the first time they'd targeted Earth's core systems. "Any survivors?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from Thane's expression. "Negative. But sir, the research data is gone. All of it. 70 terabytes of quantum mechanics research, xenobiology studies, experimental weapon prototypes, everything the Kepler team had been working on for the past 5 years. The Vorthic didn't just kill our people, they took their minds." Aldarian closed his eyes. Dr. Elena Hensley had been more than just humanity's leading quantum physicist. She'd been his wife's closest friend, godmother to his children, the brilliant woman who'd spent her 30s unlocking the secrets of fold space travel was now either dead or worse, enslaved by creatures who viewed sentient beings as biological data storage. His comm chimed with an incoming priority transmission. Admiral Crane's weathered face materialized in the hologram, his expression grim. "Vex, I need you back on Luna immediately. We've got 7 more research stations that have gone dark in the past 6 hours. The collective isn't just raiding anymore, they're systematically targeting our scientific infrastructure." "Understood, sir. What's our response?" Crane's eyes hardened. "Congress is debating sanctions and diplomatic protests. The Colonial Committee wants to file a formal complaint with the Galactic Mediation Council." He paused, letting the absurdity of bureaucratic solutions sink in. "But you and I both know the collective doesn't negotiate. They take what they want and leave graveyards behind." Aldarian stared down at the scratched Vorthic symbols, feeling something cold and predatory uncoiling in his chest. "What are you thinking, Admiral?" "I'm thinking that 73 of our best and brightest just got turned into living computers for alien parasites. I'm thinking that every minute we waste on politics is another minute those bastards are drilling knowledge out of human skulls." Crane leaned forward. "I'm also thinking that Admiral Reeves is about to have a very convenient accident. That leaves her fleet temporarily under my command." The implication hit like a thunderbolt. Admiral Crane was talking about going rogue, abandoning the careful, diplomatic dance that had kept humanity from open war with the more powerful galactic civilizations. It was career suicide at best, total species extinction at worst. "Sir, if we attack the collective directly, the Council will condemn us. Our allies will abandon us and will be branded as a rogue species." Crane finished. "Yes, I've run the simulations, but here's what the politicians don't understand. Commander, sometimes being right isn't about survival. Sometimes it's about making sure the bastards who hurt you pay in blood." Aldarian looked around the devastated laboratory one more time, imagining Dr. Hensley's final moments. The Vorthic had made one critical miscalculation in their raids. They'd assumed humans would respond like every other species they'd encountered, with fear, with negotiation, with the desperate hope that submission might buy survival. They'd never encountered a species that considered vengeance a moral imperative. "When do we leave, sir?" Crane smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Aldarian had ever seen on a human face. "Immediately." The retribution dropped out of fold space like a falling star, her hull scarred from 6 months of preparation in the deepest black sites humanity could offer. Admiral Crane had kept his word. Admiral Reeves had suffered a convenient shuttle malfunction, leaving Crane in command of the 4th Fleet's most experimental warship. What Earth Command didn't know was that Retribution carried more than standard armaments. Commander Aldarian stood on the bridge, watching the tactical display as their target resolved into clarity. Harvester Station Kes-7, a massive Vorthic processing facility orbiting a dead star. Intelligence suggested this was where captured scientists were taken for cognitive extraction, a process that left victims alive but mentally hollow, their knowledge absorbed into the collective's vast database. Sensor sweep complete, reported Chief Petty Officer Marcus Dent, his fingers dancing across holographic controls. Station houses approximately 12,000 Vorthok, plus, his voice faltered. Sir, I'm reading human life signs. Roughly 300 individuals in the lower decks. Crane's knuckles whitened as he gripped his command chair. 300 survivors from dozens of raided colonies, kept alive as living hard drives. Distance to target, 40,000 kilometers. And closing, launched the race. The Retribution's bay doors split open, releasing 12 sleek fighters that had never appeared on any official manifest. Each Wraith carried a single pilot and enough experimental antimatter charges to crack a moon. More importantly, they carried humanity's first successful attempt at psychic shielding, crude but effective protection against the Vorthic's primary weapon. Lieutenant Cora Thane's voice crackled over the comm from Wraith 1. Retribution, this is Ghost Leader. We're getting heavy interference. The bastards are trying to scramble our brains. Hold formation, Aldarian commanded, watching his tactical board light up with enemy signatures. Remember, the psychic attacks only work if you let them in. Think about home. Think about what they took from us. The Vorthic defense grid activated with predatory efficiency. Plasma batteries swiveled toward the incoming human formation, while sleek interceptors poured from launch bays like metallic wasps. But the collective had grown complacent. From centuries of easy victories, they'd never faced an enemy that had spent 6 months studying their tactics, their weaknesses, their arrogant assumptions about inferior species. The first Vorthic interceptor exploded in a brilliant flash as Thane put an antimatter torpedo through its engine core. The pilot's death scream echoed across psychic frequencies, a keen of surprise and pain that the surviving Vorthic felt like a physical blow. What? The collective mental voice rippled with confusion. How do they resist the mind death? How do they think strike back? Ghost 2, lock onto that command tower, Thane ordered, her fighter weaving between streams of coherent energy. Let's see how they like a taste of their own medicine. The second Wraith fired its experimental payload, not antimatter, but something far more disturbing. Humanity had reverse-engineered Vorthic psychic technology and weaponized it, turning empathic communion into a torture device. The modified psychic disruptor hit the station's command center like a mental sledgehammer, broadcasting pure human rage directly into the collective's shared consciousness. Suddenly, 12,000 alien minds experienced the full weight of human fury, not the cold calculation of professional soldiers, but the white-hot vengeance of a species that had watched their children's teachers burned alive, their greatest thinkers enslaved, their peaceful research stations turned into slaughterhouses. The Vorthic station's lights flickered as the collective writhed under the assault. These weren't the desperate thoughts of cornered prey they'd grown accustomed to harvesting. This was something new, something that burned like acid across their shared mental network, the pure essence of a predator. Species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of violence. Impossible, the collective whispered in unison. Primitives cannot wound the eternal mind. We are the learned ones. We harvest knowledge from the weak. Another antimatter charge tore through a defense platform, taking with it the minds of 300 Vorthic technicians. Their death agonies flooded the psychic network, carrying with them a new and terrible understanding. Humanity wasn't just fighting back, they were enjoying it. Ghost Leader to Retribution, Thane reported, her voice tight with concentration as she rolled her fighter between the particle beams. Station defenses are dropping. Whatever those psychic scramblers are doing to them, it's working. Aldarian watched the tactical display with predatory satisfaction. Each exploding Vorthic ship weakened the collective's mental cohesion, while each human victory strengthened their psychic defenses. It was a feedback loop. The aliens had never encountered an enemy that grew stronger from violence, rather than weaker. All Wraiths, concentrate fire on the prison sectors, he commanded. We're going in. The Retribution surged forward, her experimental weapons charging with an ominous whine. Admiral Crane had violated every treaty, stolen classified technology, and essentially declared war on behalf of the entire human species. And as the first Vorthic station burned in the void, Aldarian realized it still wasn't enough. The rescued survivors were broken in ways that made Aldarian's hands shake with rage. Dr. Marina Volkov, formerly the head of xenobiology at Luna University, sat in the Retribution's medical bay staring at nothing. Her neural pathways showed massive trauma, not physical, but cognitive. The Vorthik had spent 3 months carefully extracting every memory related to her research, leaving her brilliant mind full of holes. She keeps asking for her daughter, Dr. Hayes. The ship's chief medical officer explained quietly, but according to her files, Marina never had children. The memory extraction process, it doesn't just take what they want, it damages everything around it. Aldarian knelt beside Marina's bed, studying the vacant expression of a woman who'd once debated him about ethics and xenobiology for 6 hours straight. Dr. Volkov, can you hear me? Her eyes focused with difficulty. I was working on something important. Something about their metabolism. They need. Her face crumpled in frustration. Why can't I remember? It's going to be. Okay. He lied smoothly. We're taking you home. But as he stood to leave, Marina's hand shot out with surprising strength, gripping his wrist. For a moment, her eyes were completely lucid. Commander, she whispered urgently, the collective. They're not just harvesters. They're running from something. Something that scared them so badly they had to become parasites to survive. When they were in my head, I felt it absolute terror, older than stars. Before he could respond, her grip loosened and the vacant look returned. Dr. Hayes gently sedated her, but Aldarian couldn't shake her words. On the bridge, Admiral Crane was reviewing intelligence reports with the grim satisfaction of a man who'd found his life's purpose. 17 stations hit in the past week, he announced to the assembled senior staff. We've rescued over 800 survivors and eliminated roughly 40,000 Vorthik, sir. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Joe interjected. We're receiving formal protests from the Galactic Council. The Andromedan Embassy has threatened to revoke our trade agreements if we continue these unprovoked attacks. Crane's laugh was bitter. Unprovoked. They abducted our people and turned them into living computers. If that's not provocation, what is? The Council considers the collective's actions to be resource acquisition. Within acceptable parameters, Joe replied, consulting her datapad. According to their statement, humanity's violent response is disproportionate and threatens galactic stability. Chief Dent looked up from his sensor station, his face pale. Sir, we're getting priority signals from Earth Command. They're ordering immediate cessation of all hostile activities and recall of all fleet assets. The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew what this meant. Earth's government, facing pressure from more powerful alien civilizations, was abandoning the rescue mission. The survivors they'd saved would be returned to processing facilities, and future raids would continue unopposed. Aldarian felt something cold settle in his stomach. Admiral Crane stood slowly, his weathered face set in lines of granite determination. Communications, send the following message to Earth Command. Message received and understood. Fleet returning to base immediately. He paused, then smiled with predatory satisfaction. Chief Dent, how long until that message reaches Earth? 36 hours at current relay speeds, sir. Excellent. That gives us time to hit 3 more processing facilities before they can send someone to stop us. The ethical implications hung heavy in the air. They were now officially rogue, operating without government sanction and in direct violation of multiple galactic treaties. But as Aldarian looked around the bridge at the faces of his crewmen and women, who'd seen the broken survivors, who'd witnessed the casual cruelty of cognitive extraction, he saw only grim resolve. Sir, Joe said quietly, there's something else. Our intelligence network reports massive Vorthik fleet movements in the Tau Ceti system. They're massing for something big. The tactical display shifted, showing enemy force concentrations that made Aldarian's blood run cold. Hundreds of ships, thousands of processing facilities, military assets on a scale that dwarfed anything the collective had deployed before. They're not just defending, Crane realized. They're preparing for a harvest campaign, something large enough to require their entire fleet. Dent's fingers flew across his controls as new data streamed in. Sir, I'm detecting massive energy buildups in 17 different systems. These aren't random raids, they're coordinating a simultaneous strike. Against who? Unknown, but based on fleet positioning. Dent's voice trailed off as the implications became clear. Sir, I think they're targeting core worlds. Not just human colonies, Andromedan systems, Centauri trade hubs, even some council member worlds. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. The collective wasn't just harvesting human knowledge, they were preparing for something that required the combined intellectual resources of multiple civilizations. And based on Marina's broken warning, they were running from something that had them terrified enough to risk open war with the galactic community. How long do we have? Crane asked. Based on energy readings, 48 hours until they're ready to move. Aldarian stared at the tactical display, weighing their options. The Retribution and her small escort fleet couldn't possibly fight the entire collective. But if they did nothing, billions of sentient beings across dozens of worlds would suffer the same fate. As the Kepler researchers, Admiral, he said quietly, we need to warn the Council. The same Council that just ordered us to stand down while our people were being tortured. The same Council that's about to lose half their member worlds if we don't act. Crane considered this, then nodded grimly. Very well, but we're not just warning them, Commander. We're going to show them exactly what happens when you abandon humanity to monsters. He turned to the communications officer, opened a channel to all Galactic Council members, all allied governments, and every major news network in known space. It's time the galaxy learned what the collective really is. The council chamber on Nexus Prime fell silent as the holographic transmission from the Retribution filled the vast amphitheater. Admiral Crane's image stood before representatives of 47 different species, his scarred face illuminated by the cold light of emergency sessions. Honored delegates, he began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. 6 hours ago, humanity intercepted collective communications detailing their next harvest operation. I'm transmitting tactical data now. The chamber's displays, lit up with intelligence gathered at the cost of human lives, fleet positions, target lists, and most damning of all, recorded psychic emanations from collective command nodes. The alien representatives watched in growing horror as the true scope of the operation became clear. Council Speaker Zeth Kaler, a towering insectoid from the hive worlds, rose from her podium. Admiral Crane, these accusations are not accusations. Crane interrupted. Evidence. The collective plans to simultaneously harvest 17 core worlds, including 3 council member systems. Their target list includes children's schools, medical facilities, and research universities. They're not just taking military assets, they want every thinking mind in the galaxy. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the chamber, but the data was undeniable. Even as they watched, collective fleets were moving into position around some of the most protected worlds in known space. Ambassador Krellinox of the Andromedan hegemony activated his communication node. Assuming this intelligence is accurate, what action do you propose, Admiral? Your species lacks the military capacity to challenge the collective directly. Crane's smile was sharp as broken glass. You're right. Humanity can't win a conventional war against the collective. But we don't fight conventional wars. The tactical display shifted, showing the current positions of human assets throughout the galaxy. What the Council saw defied their understanding of human capabilities, not massive fleets or super weapons, but something far more dangerous. For the past 6 months, while you debated diplomatic solutions, we've been placing assets inside collective space, not warships, people, human engineers, technicians, and volunteers who infiltrated processing stations, shipyards, and command centers. They've been waiting for one word from me. At that moment, across 17 different star systems, the word went out. Station Keth 9 erupted in flame as Chief Engineer Maria Santos detonated the antimatter charges. She'd spent 3 months carefully placing throughout the facility's power core. Her sacrifice took 40,000 Vorthik and crippled their primary fleet assembly point. Shipyard Delta 7 tore itself apart as Lieutenant Commander Alex Petrov triggered the cascade failure he'd programmed into their construction algorithms. 12 capital ships, nearly complete, became twisted metal sculptures as their own building systems turned against them. Processing facility Omega-3 experienced what the collective would later describe as impossible system failures as Dr. Robert Kim's computer virus spread through their neural networks, turning their own psychic amplifiers into weapons that destroyed their minds from within. The pattern repeated across collective space humans who'd volunteered for suicide missions, infiltrators who'd spent months preparing for this moment, ordinary people who decided that some things were worth dying for. In the council chamber, the delegates watched in stunned silence as tactical displays showed collective assets exploding across half the galaxy. The The carefully coordinated harvest operation was collapsing into chaos, as critical infrastructure simply ceased to exist. Impossible, breathed Ambassador Krellinox. The collective security protocols should have detected such infiltration. They would have, Crane agreed, if they'd been looking for the right thing. But the collective assumes all species value individual survival over collective action. They scan for weapons, for military assets, for conventional threats. They don't scan for a grandmother who's willing to walk into a reactor core to avenge her granddaughter. The scale of human sacrifice was staggering. Over 3,000 volunteers had given their lives in coordinated strikes across collective space, each one taking critical infrastructure with them. But the cost to the enemy was far greater. Their harvest fleet was crippled, their command structure in chaos, and their carefully planned operation in ruins. The collective will retaliate. Council Speaker Zeth Kaler warned. They'll target human worlds directly. Let them try, Crane replied grimly. Earth has been preparing for that possibility since this began. As if summoned by his words, new contacts appeared on the tactical display. The collective's reserve fleets, pulled from their positions around core worlds, were converging on the Sol system, hundreds of ships, enough firepower to crack a planet's crust, bearing down on humanity's homeworld. But as the enemy armada approached Earth's outer defenses, they encountered something unprecedented. In galactic warfare, the asteroid belt around Sol had been transformed into the largest minefield in recorded history, not with conventional explosives, but with the same psychic disruptors that had proven so effective against collective forces. The first collective ship to enter the field experienced something no member of their species had ever felt: complete mental isolation, cut off from the shared consciousness that defined their existence. The crew went insane within minutes. The ship's erratic course took it directly into 3 more vessels, creating a cascade of destruction and madness. What have you done? Zeth Kaler whispered, her compound eyes reflecting the light of dying ships. We've given them a choice. Crane replied. They can withdraw from human space and return our people, or they can learn what happens when you threaten a species that considers vengeance a moral imperative. The collective fleet hesitated at the edge of the minefield, their shared consciousness reeling from the loss of so many minds. For the first time in their species' history, they faced an enemy that fought not just with weapons, but with weaponized hatred, pure human rage made manifest in technology designed specifically to cause maximum psychological trauma. In that moment of hesitation, humanity struck again, not with ships or soldiers, but with something far more dangerous: the truth. Every major communication network in the galaxy received detailed recordings of collective atrocities, survivor testimonies, and evidence of the massive harvest operation that had been thwarted by human sacrifice. The galaxy watched, and for the first time in centuries, someone stood up to the monsters in the dark. The Battle of Sol began when the collective finally found the courage to breach humanity's psychological minefield. Harvester Prime Yethmer, commanding the collective's largest assault force, had made the decision that would haunt his species for generations. Rather than retreat in the face of human psychological warfare, he ordered his fleet to link their consciousness even more tightly, creating a singular hive mind that could theoretically withstand the isolation effects of the psychic disruptors. It was the worst mistake in collective military history. Contact. Chief Dent's voice cracked across the Retribution's bridge as 800 collective ships emerged from fold space in perfect formation. Enemy fleet is maintaining tight formation. They're sharing a single consciousness across all vessels. Admiral Crane studied the tactical display with predatory satisfaction. Perfect. Commander Aldarian, signal all human assets. Operation Mindbreak is authorized. Throughout the Sol system, humanity's last desperate gambit activated. Psychic amplifiers hidden in asteroids, embedded in defunct satellites, and concealed within the hulks of destroyed ships, all activated simultaneously, broadcasting a signal that had taken 6 months to perfect. The signal wasn't random noise or simple jamming. It was something far more insidious, a concentrated broadcast of every human emotion associated with loss, transmitted at frequencies designed to bypass collective mental defenses. Grief for murdered children, rage at stolen minds, despair at broken loved ones, and beneath it all, the terrible joy of absolute vengeance. The effect on the linked collective consciousness was immediate and catastrophic. 800 ships suddenly experienced the concentrated emotional trauma of an entire species. Pilots, who had never felt individual emotion, were overwhelmed by human anguish, while commanders accustomed to cold logic found themselves drowning in waves of barely controlled fury. Harvester Prime Yethmer's consciousness fractured as he experienced his first taste of genuine human hatred. The emotion burned through his mind like acid, carrying with it the accumulated weight of every atrocity the collective had committed against innocent civilians. What is this darkness? His thoughts screamed across the fleet network. How do they make feeling into weapon? How do they? His words dissolved into psychic static as 3 destroyer captains, overwhelmed by unfamiliar grief, opened fire on their own command ships. The carefully maintained formation collapsed into chaos as individual vessels, their crews mad with borrowed human emotions, began attacking everything within range. But the collective had now survived for millennia by being easily defeated. Even as their forward elements tore themselves apart, the reserve fleets adapted with ruthless efficiency, severing links, transmitted Fleet Commander Zeftel from the second wave. All ships revert to individual consciousness, prepare for conventional assault. The tactical situation shifted as 400 collective ships, their crews now isolated from the emotional broadcast, surged forward with renewed coordination. Their particle cannons lit space with deadly coherent light, while antimatter torpedoes streaked toward human defensive positions. Earth's orbital fortresses responded, with everything humanity had built in 6 months of frantic preparation. Kinetic kill vehicles launched from Luna's mass drivers, while fusion mines detonated in carefully planned patterns, turning the space around Earth into a maelstrom of radiation and shrapnel. The first human casualties came when Fortress Europa took a direct hit from a collective dreadnought's main battery. Commander Helena Ross and her crew of 300 simply vanished in a flash of annihilated matter, their sacrifice buying time for evacuation transports to clear the inner system. Fortress Europa is gone, Lieutenant Thane reported from her fighter, now leading the remnants of humanity's ace pilots in a desperate delay in action. Civilian evacuation is only 60% complete. Hold the line, Aldarian commanded, watching his tactical display fill with red icons as more human assets died. Every minute we buy saves 1,000 lives. The battle evolved into something unprecedented in galactic warfare, not a clash between professional militaries, but a desperate struggle between a species fighting for survival, and one accustomed to easy prey. Human ships, outgunned and outnumbered, used tactics that horrified council observers watching the live feeds. Captain Maria Santos, commanding the destroyer Vengeance, rammed her ship directly into the collective flagship's bridge, detonating her fusion reactor in the enemy's command center. Her final transmission echoed across all frequencies for the children of Kepler Station. Lieutenant Commander Joe, her cruiser's weapons offline and engines failing, directed her ship into the densest enemy formation before triggering every antimatter charge aboard. The explosion took out 7 collective vessels and damaged 12 more, but cost humanity its most experienced tactical officer. The pattern repeated throughout the system as human commanders chose suicide attacks over retreat, each sacrifice inflicting disproportionate damage on an enemy unprepared for such fanatical resistance. But the collective learned quickly. As more human ships died in ramming attacks, they began maintaining greater distances, using their superior range to engage human forces before they could close for suicide runs. "We're losing," Admiral Crane admitted quietly, watching the casualty reports stream across his display. 70% of Earth's defensive fleet was gone. The orbital fortresses were falling one by one, and the enemy still had over 200 operational ships. "Sir," Chief Dent called out, his voice tight with excitement, "I'm detecting massive fold space distortions throughout the system. Something big is coming." The tactical display exploded with new contacts as the cavalry finally arrived, not from Earth, but from the most unlikely source imaginable, the Galactic Council itself. Council Enforcement Fleet Alpha dropped out of fold space in perfect battle formation, led by the Andromedan dreadnought Eternal Judgment. Behind them came ships from 17 different species, their weapons already charging as they moved to engage the collective forces. Collective vessels. Admiral Krelinox's voice boomed across all frequencies. "You are in violation of galactic sovereignty laws. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The tide of battle turned in that moment, as the exhausted human forces found themselves reinforced by the most powerful military alliance in the galaxy. But the cost had been enormous. 3/4 of Earth's fleet was gone, and the collectives Retreat would be anything but bloodless. The collective's response to Council intervention was swift and brutal. They turned their retreat into a fighting withdrawal that would be remembered as one of the bloodiest engagements in galactic history. Fleet Commander Zeftel, his ship's hull scarred from human suicide attacks, made the decision that would define the next phase of the battle. Rather than fleeing directly, the collective would conduct a systematic destruction of everything humanity held dear, forcing the Council forces to choose between pursuit and protecting civilian targets. All vessels, his transmission echoed across the dying fleet. Implement Scorched Void Protocol. Deny the primitives their victory. The collective's remaining ships split into smaller formations, each targeting a different human settlement. Mars colonies, asteroid mining stations, research outposts, everything that represented human civilization became a target for species-ending spite. Aboard the Retribution, Admiral Crane watched the enemy disposition with growing horror. They're not retreating, they're trying to commit genocide on their way out. Commander Aldarian studied the tactical display, his mind racing through possible responses. The Council fleet was powerful, but it was also spread thin, trying to protect multiple targets simultaneously. Human assets were nearly exhausted, and civilian evacuation was still incomplete. Sir, Lieutenant Thane's voice crackled over the comm from her battered fighter. I've got 12 collective ships moving toward the Luna colonies, estimated to million civilians in the target zone. Before Crane could respond, an unexpected voice cut across the communication channel. Dr. Marina Volkov, the rescued scientist whose mind had been damaged by collective extraction. Admiral, she said, her words clearer than they'd been in months. I remember now what they were afraid of, what made them become parasites in the first place. On the bridge, everyone turned toward the medical bay's camera feed. Dr. Volkov sat upright in her bed, her eyes focused with an intensity that had been absent since her rescue. There's something out in the deep dark, she continued, her voice gaining strength. Something that hunts psychic species. The collective isn't just harvesting knowledge, they're trying to make themselves stronger, smarter, because they know it's coming for them. Doctor, Aldarian said gently, we need to focus on the immediate threat. No, you don't understand, Volkov interrupted. The extraction process showed me their deepest fears. They're terrified of individual consciousness because that's what it hunts: unique minds, creative thoughts, everything that makes a species more than just biological machinery. Chief Dent looked up from his sensor station, his face pale. Sir, I'm detecting anomalous readings from the outer system. Something's coming out of fold space, but it's not showing up on standard sensors. The tactical display flickered, then stabilized to show something impossible: a ship that wasn't quite there, existing in the spaces between dimensions, approaching the battlefield with predatory patience. The Devourers, Marina whispered, her face reflecting ancient terror. That's what the collective calls them. They consume consciousness itself, leaving empty shells behind. That's why the collective became parasites. They thought if they spread their minds across enough hosts, they could survive the harvest. As if summoned by her words, the phantom ship fully materialized, a crystalline structure the size of a small moon, its surface pulsing with energies that hurt to look at directly, even through the protective shields. Every human on the Retribution felt their thoughts becoming sluggish, their individual identity beginning to blur. The collective fleet's reaction was immediate and primal: absolute panic. Ships that had been systematically destroying human settlements suddenly broke off their attacks, fleeing in random directions as their crews experienced terror on a cellular level. The precise military formation collapsed into chaos as centuries of suppressed fear overwhelmed tactical doctrine. But the Council forces were affected too. Andromedan telepaths collapsed at their stations, their minds recoiling from contact with something fundamentally inimical to conscious thought. Even the heavily shielded human ships found their crews struggling to maintain coherent thought patterns. All ships, emergency jump to preset coordinates, Admiral Krellin OX commanded, his usually calm voice tight with barely controlled panic. Execute immediately. But the Devourer ship had created some kind of interdiction field. Fold space drives refused to engage, leaving all combatants trapped in the same system with a predator that fed on the very essence of sentience. Sir, Chief Dent reported, his words slurred as if he were falling asleep. The thing's generating some kind of consciousness dampening field. Everyone's becoming. His voice trailed off as his individual identity began to dissolve. Around the bridge, other crew members showed similar symptoms: glassy eyes, slack expressions. The terrible blank look of minds being drained of everything that made them unique. But Commander Aldarian, standing near the psychic amplifiers they'd used against the collective, suddenly realized something crucial. The human rage broadcasts, he said, his voice cutting through the mental fog. They're designed to amplify emotion, to make individual consciousness stronger, not weaker. He activated the ship's internal communication system, bypassing the standard channels to speak directly to every human vessel in the fleet. All ships activate emotional amplifiers. Maximum power. Don't fight the fear, embrace it. Remember why we're here. Remember what they took from us. Throughout the human fleet, psychic amplifiers designed to torment the collective suddenly served a different purpose. Instead of broadcasting human emotion outward, they turned inward, strengthening each individual mind against the devourer's consciousness-draining field. The effect was immediate and startling. Human crews, their thoughts clear and sharp with amplified rage, began coordinating a defense while collective and council forces struggled with mental dissolution. "This is our moment," Admiral Crane announced, his voice carrying across all human frequencies, while everyone else is helpless. "We end this, all of it. The collective, the devourers, everything that threatens conscious life in this galaxy." Lieutenant Thane, her fighter systems enhanced by emotional amplification, led the charge against the crystalline ship. Her weapons, calibrated for maximum psychic disruption, struck the devourer vessel's hull with devastating effect. The creature, for it was a creature, they realized, not a ship, recoiled from the attack with something resembling surprise. It had never encountered a species that could weaponize their own consciousness, turning individual identity into a form of armor against mental predation. All human vessels, focus fire on the crystalline structure, Aldarian commanded. Our psychic weapons are the only thing that can hurt it. As humanity's surviving ships converged on the devourer, something unprecedented happened. The collective fleet, the crews slowly recovering from the consciousness drain, began moving to support the human attack, not out of gratitude or alliance, but from the desperate understanding that humanity represented their only hope against the ancient enemy. Fleet Commander Zephthal's transmission crackled across the battlefield. "Primitive species, we request temporary cooperation against the greater threat." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The collective, who had spent centuries harvesting other species' minds, were now begging for help from the very beings they tried to enslave. The final battle lasted 18 minutes and changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Commander Aldarian watched from the Retribution's bridge as humanity's surviving ships, supported by desperate collective forces and slowly recovering council vessels, poured everything they had into the devourer. The crystalline entity writhed under the assault, its consciousness-draining field fluctuating as psychic disruptors tore through its defenses. Direct hit on what looks like a neural cluster, Lieutenant Thane reported, her fighter weaving between streams of coherent darkness that the creature used as weapons. The things definitely hurt its trying to withdraw to fold space, but Admiral Crane had anticipated this. Chief Dent, activate the soul interdiction grid. Throughout the system, hidden emitters that had been building charge for 6 months suddenly activated, creating a fold space barrier that trapped everything within the system's boundaries. The devourer, cut off from its escape route, turned with renewed fury on its attackers. What happened next would be debated by xenobiologists for centuries. The devourer, faced with imminent destruction, released something that can only be described as a psychic death scream, a final attempt to drain every conscious mind in the system. Before its own destruction, the wave of mental annihilation swept outward at the speed of thought, and for a moment, it seemed that every thinking being in the soul system would be reduced to empty shells. Council ships went dark as their crews collapsed. Collective vessels drifted helplessly as their shared consciousness shattered. But humanity's emotional amplifiers, designed to strengthen individual identity against psychic attack, held firm. More than held, they turned the devourer's final attack back on itself, reflecting the creature's own hunger for consciousness directly into its core. The crystalline ship imploded with a flash of impossible colors, taking with it the nightmares that had haunted the collective for millennia. In the sudden silence that followed, damaged ships from 3 different species drifted in the aftermath of the most unusual alliance in galactic history. Fleet Commander Zeftal was the first to break the silence. "Primitive human species. The eternal mind acknowledges debt." "Acknowledged," Admiral Crane replied tersely. "Now return our people." What followed was the largest prisoner exchange in recorded history. Over 15,000 human scientists, researchers, and civilians were returned from collective processing facilities, many of them damaged but alive. In return, humanity shared the technology behind their psychic amplifiers not as a gift, but as insurance against future devourer incursions. Dr. Marina Volkov, her memories slowly returning, became the leading expert on devourer psychology. Her research, built on the traumatic extraction she'd endured, provided the foundation for the galaxy's first effective defense against consciousness-draining entities. The Galactic Council, humbled by their near destruction and impressed by humanity's unique approach to psychic warfare, offered Earth full membership and a permanent seat on the Security Committee. The offer came with access to advanced technologies, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts. Admiral Crane declined. "We appreciate the gesture," he told the assembled delegates, "but humanity has learned something important from this experience. The galaxy is full of predators who disguise themselves as civilized beings, and the only defense against them is the willingness to be more brutal than they are. Instead, humanity established the Terran Defense Compact, a loose alliance of species who had suffered under collective harvesting. Unlike the Council's diplomatic approach, the compact was built on a simple principle: any species that preyed on civilian populations would face total war. Waged with every dirty trick humanity could devise, the collective, their ancient terror of the devourers, finally ended, faced a choice. They could continue their predatory ways and face humanity's weaponized hatred, or they could adapt to a galaxy where their victims had learned to fight back. Most chose adaptation. The shared trauma of the devourer attack, combined with humanity's demonstration that consciousness could be weaponized, led to the first philosophical revolution in collective history. Individual identity, previously suppressed in favor of group consciousness, began to emerge as younger collective members experimented with independent thought, but not all adapted. The hardline factions, led by survivors who refused to abandon millennia of predatory behavior, retreated to the galactic rim, where they continued their harvesting operations against unprotected species. They lasted exactly 6 months before humanity's cultural exchange program reached them. Volunteer expeditions that specialized in teaching isolated species how to build psychic amplifiers and organize effective resistance movements. Commander Aldarian, promoted to admiral and given command of the cultural exchange program, stood on the bridge of his new flagship watching another collective harvesting operation dissolve into chaos as their intended victims fought back with human-designed weapons. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender signals from the collective fleet. They're requesting terms." "Standard terms," Aldarian replied. "Return all prisoners, provide reparations to their victims, and submit to monitoring by species they've previously targeted." He paused, watching another slaver ship explode as primitive locals used jury-rigged psychic disruptors. "Or they can continue fighting people who've learned that survival sometimes requires becoming the monster." The final tally of the Sol campaign was sobering. Humanity had lost 60% of its military assets and over 1 million civilians. But in exchange, they'd broken the collective as a galactic threat, eliminated the devourer menace, and established themselves as the species other civilizations called when diplomacy failed. Years later, xenohistorians would debate whether humanity's methods had been necessary or excessive. The Council maintained that diplomatic solutions could have been found. Humanitarian organizations questioned the ethics of weaponizing emotion and teaching violence to peaceful species. But in the Outer Rim territories, where grateful populations erected monuments to the humans who taught them to fight back, the answer was simpler. Sometimes, the only way to stop a monster was to become something worse. And humanity, descended from persistent hunters who chased prey across continents and apex predators who'd conquered their own world through stubborn refusal to quit, had proven very good at being worse when necessary. The galaxy was safer for it, even if it was no longer quite as civilized. In the end, the collective had learned the truth that would define the next era of galactic politics. You could abduct humanity's scientists, steal their knowledge, and torment their loved ones, but you couldn't understand the fury that followed until it was far too late to matter.